In this video, we're going to look at recycling nitrogen in the environment. We're going to talk about why nitrogen is important for living things, look at some of the nitrogenous compounds or compounds containing nitrogen that are found in the environment, as well as looking at the way that the nitrogen cycle moves that nitrogen around the environment into its different forms and the generally bacteria that is responsible for that. So firstly, why nitrogen is important. It's needed for all living things and for the productions of amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. It also is needed for nucleic acids, which is what makes up DNA. So it's part of the DNA. So it's needed for that. So they're very important in growth and repair of an organism. Nitrogen comes in many different forms within the environment. The by far largest form of nitrogen is atmospheric nitrogen, N2, which is found in the atmosphere. And it makes up around 70% of the atmosphere. So there's a lot of nitrogen in the air. The problem is that the nitrogen in the air cannot be used by plants or animals. It's relatively inert. So that nitrogen needs to be converted into nitrate, which is able to be used by plants, or ammonium, which can be used by some plants. Now, when those plants use that nitrate, they then convert it into other organic nitrogenous compounds, for example, the amino acids or nucleic acids that I mentioned in the previous slide. And a waste product of humans or animals is urea, which also contains nitrogen. So there's other places that it's found in the environment, but the most important one by far is the nitrate, because that's what can be used by plants and then cycled through the system. So what we're going to do is look at the nitrogen cycle, which allows that atmospheric nitrogen to be turned into nitrates and used by the plants. So firstly, we're going to look at the conversion from atmospheric nitrogen, N2, into ammonium, NH4. Now this is done by bacteria in the soil, and sometimes that bacteria can be found free in the soil, including cyanobacteria, and other times it's found in a symbiotic relationship in the root nodules of legumes or rhizoids. So this picture is a close-up of the roots, and you can see those nodules there. Now those nodules contain this nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and they convert the atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium. Now some plants can use this. For example, legumes can use ammonium as a source of nitrogen, but most plants cannot. So therefore, once it's converted into ammonium, it needs to be converted into a useful form of nitrogen. And as I mentioned before, that useful form of nitrogen is nitrate. So another type of bacteria, and we call these bacteria nitrifying bacteria, convert the ammonium into nitrate. So once this happens, the plants are then able to use it. So we've gone from the nitrogen in the atmosphere, the nitrogen fixing bacteria in the roots to allow legumes to grow, nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil create ammonia, nitrifying bacteria allow nitrates to be formed, and this is used in plants. So plants are able to uptake this form of nitrogen and use it to create the things that they need. Once those plants have taken in the nitrogen in the form of nitrate, they convert it to other nitrogenous and organic nitrogenous compounds. So this includes proteins and amino acids, as we talked about before. This then cycles through the food chain, with those plants being eaten by primary consumers, those primary consumers being eaten by secondary consumers, and so forth. So all this nitrogen then is able to cycle through the food chain. So we have here the plants eaten by the heterotrophs, turning it into amino acids and proteins. Okay, now, once those plants and animals die, those nitrogenous compounds need to be broken back down into nitrates. And to do this, what happens is we have detritivores, which are the organisms that help in the decay of dead organic matter, and they break down the proteins, amino acids, nucleic acids, and they turn that back into ammonium and release that back into the soil. Another way that nitrogen goes back into the soil is the waste products of animals. And I talked about urea before, something that's found in urine, as well as there's other nitrogenous waste products that are found in faeces. And that's why using manure from animals on the garden is a good way to get those nitrates back into the soil. So we have our amino acids and organic nitrogenous compounds. They're broken down by detritivores, turned back into ammonia. That way the nitrifying bacteria can then work on them again, cycling them back into the food chain. Now, as well as the nitrogen fixing and nitrifying bacteria, we also have another type of bacteria that lives in soil, and that's called de-nitrifying bacteria. And what it does is it feeds on those nitrates and converts it back to atmospheric nitrogen. So this is something that we don't want, for example, if we have a crop, but it's something that we can't really avoid. If we've got one type of bacteria, usually we've got lots of different types, and there is a type that converts it back into atmospheric nitrogen, and that nitrates, organic nitrogen, is then lost into the atmosphere. So we've got our denitrifying bacteria over here, and they convert back into the atmospheric nitrogen. In this video, we've looked at why nitrogen is important in an ecosystem, and that is for the creation of proteins and nucleic acids in plants and animals. We've looked at the different nitrogenous compounds, for example, atmospheric nitrogen, which is the largest store of nitrogen, however, it's not able to be used by plants or animals. We've looked at nitrogen-fixing bacteria, bacteria that convert the atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium. We've looked at nitrifying bacteria, bacteria that convert the ammonium into nitrates. We've looked at how plants take those nitrates and convert them into the other nitrogenous compounds, for example, the amino acids and nucleic acids. When they die, the detritivores come in and take those amino acids and break them down back into ammonium, ready to be used again by the nitrifying bacteria to create nitrates and cycle within the soil. And we've also looked at the bad guy in the nitrogen cycle, the denitrifying bacteria that take those precious nitrates and release them back into the atmosphere in the form of atmospheric nitrogen.